All right, recording right now. Thank you, Lars, for the reminder. When we left off, I was talking about the idea of putting lipstick on a pig, where that concept is, again, right? You're taking something that looks like garbage and making it look prettier. So buying the ugliest building on the best block. Okay. So let's go back to where we were in our spreadsheet, and when we were at was thinking about the rent roll and its income generating possibilities on the basis of it being occupied, where vacancy represents the chance to move upward in terms of your income. But the rent roll is specific then just really to this base rental income piece. If we want to get more specific, this is the sheet that matters most to me. You will hear me say regularly that cash is king. And when I say cash is king, that was something I picked up in business school that is very common. It's not really cash, it's cash flow is king. Because you think of it this way, if I have cash, what is the responsibility of cash? Cash generates cash flow. If I have $1 million in cash, the idea is I can invest it and earn a marginal rate of return and generate cash flows. So cash flow projections are the most critical thing because the rent roll only looks at one piece. It looks at the rental revenue coming in. Cash flows are inclusive of three pieces. We think that cash flows have the following three pieces. There is income and expense from operations. That's the first piece that we think about. The second thing that we think about is capital expenditures, purchasing and selling significant physical components of the building. If you put in a new elevator, that's a capital expense. If you sell the snowplow that is used to plow the parking lot and instead hire a service when you sell the truck, that's a capital expenditure inflow to you. And then the last one would be financing, which is debt and equity. So the cash flow projections is really the consolidated piece that I just typed into the chat box that makes a holistic view of everything that's going on in the building. So notice that when we got here, what we were working on was first thinking about what our base rental revenue was. And that base rental revenue again came to us from the rent roll. The rent roll then we took and we applied a basic assumption of a cost of inflation increase to rents where we allowed those rents to grow by 3% every year. Then as it related to reimbursements, what we realized is in any given year, whether it's for utilities or whether it's for snow plowing or some change in taxes for that year, there's always going to be a minor percent of our revenue base that we recapture as a percentage of that total rental income. So we used a 2.5% metric against the total initial rental income to get ourselves a reimbursement amount, which you see is pretty small. And then two, we decided to keep that constant and calculate that across the years to give us then our total effective total rents or gross now revenue or sales, if you want to think of it in the context outside of real estate. Then we made our assumptions relative to real estate taxes, which you notice is then working then again on a per square foot basis. If I look at my reference, B11 is the cost per, overview D1 is my square footage. So my cash flow projections relative to expense for operating on real estate was on the basis of square foot. The same thing goes for common area. We make an estimate based off of a square footage. And what you have to realize too is that when I do this work and I'm coming up with $5 per, it's because somewhere else I have a really detailed spreadsheet. on here's how much my janitorial staff makes, and here's how much I to the snow plowing company, and here's my contract with the landscapers right now, and here's how much I buy annually in terms of office supplies. And so I've got a 200-line spreadsheet that helps me calculate here are all the costs that are going to go into maintaining the building, that then I just roll up and aggregate and say, let's make an estimate. Because I know in some years it's going to snow more than other years, and it's going to cost me more. And in some years, it's not going to snow at all. And I'll get all of that expense recapture because I don't have to pay it out. But we make a basic estimate in the Excel spreadsheet that you can then imagine there's a spreadsheet somewhere else over here with 200 lines that lets me get to that. The management fee then is again based off of our ability to generate total revenue. So once we get down to that EBITDA or net operating line, what you have is revenues minus all of your basic operating expenses, from which then we can then get to the idea of how can we purchase this building? We're going to need to pull debt into the equation. And so my reference here is into debt detail B17, which is when I get into debt detail B17, here was then my annual payment calculation, which again, Plun, I can show that one here so that you can take a look at these references momentarily. So all we're doing here is calculating the constant annuity payment, where at a rate of B9, 4.2% annually, when I have B10, 25 years in which to make this payment, and I borrow negative B8. Why the negative? It's an Excel trick because of the way that Excel thinks. I put a minus sign on front of my loan principal in B8, and that's what helps me to calculate my $294,000 payment, which you notice then the formula I used then was I just pointed to that cell and I said, just make it the same thing. 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 Which then allowed me to do my amortization table, where in order to estimate the balance of the loan at any exit point or sale point from now into 25 years in the future, if I go ahead and calculate the amount of my interest rate multiplied by the loan's balance at that time, that gives me the interest, so that the remaining part is the principal. The principal then, annual amortization, is what gets paid down. So that after I borrow $4.5 million and I pay down in the first year $294,000 worth of a total payment to the financial institution, of which $105,000 relates to principal pay down, by the end of the first year, I owe $4.394 million. Now, one of the things that we can cover tomorrow, if you like, you may have noticed that a lot of what I did, I was doing only in columns B and C, meaning I was setting up the structure on the front end, pretending like I was only dealing with 1 or 2 years worth of investment, knowing that if I solidify the construction of the spreadsheet here, when I move from years 3 to 25, it's all the same thing. So I can copy and paste so long as I set my spreadsheet up correctly. And that was the entire purpose of the debt detail page. Allows us to bring this number into interest expense, and then would allow us to estimate if I wanted to exit the property in year 4 and I could sell it for $6.3 million, I could go ahead and calculate the amount of net proceeds I would get when I sell upon exit in year 4. Why that's critical for us is after we pay the interest expense, and this is the way I always love to think about how we make our cash flow payments. cash flow payments must first be made to operate the building. That's the most important part, is having the staff in place to keep people renting. After we operate the building, then you have to pay the financial institution back for the loan. Institution. How do you spell that? Institution. After we pay the financial institutions, then now we have the ability to pay for improvements to the building that will allow us to continue to have renters in the future. And then after we pay for significant upgrades to the building, then we have money for the investors left to pay. So if you look at it here, the first thing we have to do is pay to operate the building. Number one is all there. After we pay to operate the building, we have to pay the financial institution. That's the interest expense piece here. After we pay the financial institution, we have to reserve some money to be able to make capital improvements or capital expenditures. Maybe I should put this like this: capital expenditures, which we call CapEx. And then finally, when I have money left over, called free cash flows, this is what we call the investor pref. But the term would just be the investor's preferred dividend payment. The investor pref. It's the amount of money that we're going to pay to them. Where do we get this number from? Well, this is coming from my sources and uses sheet, C32. Let's go hunt that down. C32 tells me I owe $148,200 in payments to my investors. Well, how did I get that? Every single investor, of which right now I have 12 of them, makes an initial equity investment. Here was me. I put in $150,000. Here is the man you're going to meet on Wednesday. He put in $150,000. And then here is our biggest investor, who put in $400,000, of which then have promised to get paid out an 8% preferred dividend, so that our biggest investor is expecting an 8% dividend percentage. This is the amount. This is annual. But we described that we are going to make payments quarterly. So this would be the preferred dividend for the entire year. If we wanted to, we could cut it down into smaller pieces. And so you could see that I'm going to get paid $3,000 every quarter. When we aggregate all this together, then is when we came up with the total amount of payments that we can then make to our investors of $148,000. Those payments then are the last thing that we have left to pay out, and everything we have left, this is a good English or American term, is gravy, we call it, right? It's just extra. It's just liquid deliciousness that you can pour over the building and do whatever you want with, possibly even including paying it out to our investors, because we did such an excellent job in management. The last thing I think we left off with the other day, and I got in an argument with my buddy about this on Friday night. We watched a movie together called The Death of Stalin, which was a funny little comedy starring Steve Buscemi, but we argued about what line was proper to be used for this. I wanted to use NOI divided by total sources and uses, but he's like, no, we can't really use NOI, blah, 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 and we have to do minus CapEx, etc. So our argument, finally, I said, all right, it was your original spreadsheet. If we want to know how much cash do we get back in order to be able to pay out our cash on cash return available to the investors after we've paid to operate the building and paid back the banks, we have a 10% cash rate of return. And so long as this number is bigger than the 8%, then we should have sufficient funds from which to be able to pay back our 8% promise to those investors. So the statement of cash flows is by far the most critical of all of them. Reviewing then back again into sources and uses. So when we think about talking to Maurice, he's going to say, what exactly am I investing in? And we're going to tell him, hey, Maurice, we're going to buy this building, but buying the building isn't just a purchase price. There are additional costs that go into the purchase price of the building. Costs like we have to pay the lender for doing their loan processing. But the lender is going to tell us, we're only going to give you $4.5 million because they are going to base what they give us as a percentage of the purchase price. So if they're going to pay us $4.5 million, but we need $6 million for the building, plus all additional costs, tells us that our total sources that we need to come up with is this $6.352 million. So that we have to make sure that the amount that the bank gives us plus the amount that investors give us, these numbers had better be the same. Otherwise, we're going to have a shortage. Our total sources need to match our total uses, where the margin is often made up by an investor. Let's say investor 12 pulled out on our deal for us. We need 6.352. We've only got 6.252. So we're not where we need to be. So now we got to go out and find, let me see, I like this person. Someone put, I can just call them M on the spreadsheet. All right, so now I can put M back in, and I don't have any gap in my funding anymore. So sources and uses makes us understand we can actually do this deal. Debt detail, I went over when we tangented out of the interest piece. So our last step is then, let's go back to this overview and pull it all together so we can tell Maurice the story again. Because here we are, out of the detail, back into the basics. What is it we're doing? We're buying some fancy property in Chicago. How big is it? It's 61,000 square feet, and we need to spend $6 million to buy it. When we buy that for $6 million, the basic rents, if we're not able to increase the rent roll, if we're not able to sell out the vacant spaces, and we just conservatively estimate continued current occupancy rates, we should generate about $1.2 million in rental income a year, for which we'll get a 2.5% reimbursement. My basic preference whenever I'm working within Excel is to use the cover sheet to point to the details. So I know I've got my reimbursements that I calculated over here. So instead of doing equals 2.5% times the 1.194, it's the same number. But instead of me doing it here where I could possibly make a mistake, I like to cross-reference to a pointer from a detailed sheet so that I don't accidentally cross myself up and make a wrong assumption. And then I can even do the same here and just point and suggest, here's my 1.24 in total income for the year. So Maurice, we're going to buy a $6 million building. It's going to kick off about 1.2 million in revenues every year. But it's going to cost us a bundle to get this thing running. So let's again go back and make references. How much did the cash flow projections tell us we're going to have to pay in real estate taxes? Now, what's neat about the way we set this up is, check it out. we're making the reference equals cash flow projections C11. And when I pull that over, and then when I copy and paste it down, it automatically said this third value, management fee percentage, is coming from cash flow projections C13, which cash flow projections C13 is, management fee of 60,000. So by setting up my spreadsheet properly, I've allowed myself again to be able to quickly copy and paste things so that I don't have to do a lot of monkeying around when it comes to finding and recalculating. So that 719 number would be another number Maurice might ask us, wait a minute, so it's going to kick off 1.2 million in revenue. How much does it cost to rent the building? And so we could say $719,000. Okay, so for every dollar that we have in rent, how much does it cost us to rent that thing out? So, oops, I put it in the wrong place right there. So our expense ratio would be total expenses divided by total income, where I could then say to you, how expensive is this building to run? It costs me about 59 cents to generate every $1 in rental income. That's my expense ratio. It costs me about 59 cents to operate and generate every $1 in our revenues. What that then leaves us with, Maurice, is we should have an NOI from which we can pay the banks, and that NOI will give us greater than $500,000 in annual cash flows that can be used to pay off our indebtedness. And Maurice, we're not going to have $500,000 worth of indebtedness to the bank. We're going to have plenty of money left over to give to you and the investors. Well, who are these investors? Where are you going to get your money from? I could hear Maurice asking. And so we've got a $6 million building for which, off of my sources and uses statement, and this is a fun Excel thing that you guys may have come across before, but if I look at Alt-M formulas, and from formulas, if I do trace precedence right here, this is kind of fun. I get this little ... thing to come up. When I see this ... if I move my mouse, which I hate doing, but if I move my mouse right on top of that dotted line, and then I double left click, it will tell you it is coming from here. And I can double click on that, and it will take me to, here is your reference. It's coming from sources and uses C12. And this one has a dependent. So if I trace the dependent, it will say, where did this come from? I can jump back to where it came from, and now I know how things are tied together. What else do I know? This number here also is related to that number down below. So the precedentary engineering of your formulas happens nicely by using these arrows, which I can now take off. So that again is something we could play around with tomorrow if you guys like. But what that does is it tells me, Maurice, I got to come up with $6.3 million in total. All right, who's coming along with us? Well, here's who's coming along with us. At 75% from the debt detail, we're going to bring the banks in as a partner, and they're going to kick in $4.5 million. From which then, when the bank kicks in $4.5 million, we're going to owe the banks $294,000 every single year. The reason that we're going to owe them is we're borrowing from the debt detail page at 4.2% for 25 years. The amortization and the term period are the exact same. Here's what you need to know. It's sidebar. The amortization period can be different from the loan period. You may have 25 years to pay something back, but they could amortize it over 40 years. What that does is it just changes the amount of your payments. In our case, I've made it simple, and we'll make that thing match and say that our amortization and our loan term is 25 years, which then gives me, actually, let's put it there instead. Let's put our 294,000 down here instead of up there. That way that's clean, because that's a title. So here's our annual payments. So Maurice, we're going to bring the banks along for $4.5 million, of which we're going to go ahead and have to pay them $294,000. Debt service ratio. So if we think about what is this in terms of translation, this is what I love about teaching finance versus the way that I learned it. Here's your debt service ratio. And from here, Investopedia and Corporate Finance Institute, they come up as the first two now. These are two of
your screen, sir.
Oh, thank you, because I'm only sharing Excel. Thank you for reminding me. Let's share my desktop. Okay. All right, now you should be able to see everything there. All right, so I typed in debt service ratio. And what debt service, this is tough too. If you're Dutch, how would you know this? Debt service coverage ratio is the full name of the term. So maybe I'll copy that and we'll put that back here, because it's actually the debt service coverage ratio is the name of the full ratio. And the two sites that come up are my two favorites, Investopedia and this Corporate Finance Institute. Let's look at Corporate Finance Institute, because what I like is they give you giant boomer-sized formulas right here that I can make sense of. And so look what it says. It says it's EBITDA divided by your interest plus your principal. Or it could be EBITDA minus CapEx divided by your interest plus your principal. So we can decide. We said this is NOI. I like using NOI. Matt likes using this one. We keep arguing over it. Not important. Here is the amount of money from which you have to pay the banks and then investors. So I like this first one. Let's do NOI divided by payments. So if I take equals, from where can I make my payments? From my NOI. From my NOI, I have the ability then to pay $294,000, which tells me then for every $1 I owe the banks, I have $1.72 from which I can make a payment to the bank, which tells me I've got 72 cents then left over to pay you, the investor. So debt service coverage ratio is intended to give an investor confidence that there will be plenty of money from which the banks can be paid and to which you, Mr. or Miss Investor, can be paid. So when we get to equity then, what we had said is, all right, Maurice is liking the deal right now. And he's like, well, all right, remind me, what rate of return are we going to get? And so in our sources and uses statement, we had declared we are going to pay an 8% annual dividend where we will make our payments to you every single quarter. So it's an 8% preferred rate of return, of which then we right now have commitments from our sources and uses to have $1.852 million. This money comes along with our bank's money so that we can generate the total 6.352 acquisition needed, right? 4.5 plus 1.8 is approximately 6.3. So we have enough funds because we have investors that are financial institutions providing debt and equity investors who are going to get paid a higher rate of return of the banks. Right? The banks are only getting paid 4.2% on their 5 million, but we're asking individuals and households to come up with money who are not banks. So they're going to demand, and we're going to pay them a higher rate of return because we give them less information and they take on more risk. Of which Maurice might very easily say, well, how much are the advisors bringing along? So if we wanted to, we'll say, all right, well, Kaminsky has told us that this is him and this is his partner. They're investors 1 and 2 in this deal right now. So Maurice, we're raising $1.85 million, of which I and my investor, we're going to kick in $300,000. Or, as you saw from the sources and uses, collectively, my partner and I are going to have a 16% equity interest because we, too, believe in the deal enough that we're going to put our own money in it. And we oftentimes call this skin in the game. It's a demonstration that we believe in the deal, so we have something to lose as well. And Maurice might ask, well, you told me up above you only have $500,000 after operating the building, of which about $300,000 goes to the banks. How much are you going to have to pay out in total to all of the investors? And we had determined that all of the investors are going to be owed $148,000. So we have plenty of money left over, 300 that we pay to the banks, 150 annually we pay to the investors. Of the 505 means we have plenty of money left over. To which Maurice might say, wait a minute, can you just summarize that for me? I like the detail, but let's consolidate it one more time. All right, Maurice, here is my cash flows. I am going to be able to, in year 1, generate $505,000 in net operating income, where net operating income represents rental income minus my operating costs. It's from that then I'm going to have to be able to pay the banks, and the banks are going to demand just short of $300,000 from me. That means I've got about $211,000 left. I need to make sure, though, that the building doesn't fall down. So from my cash flow projections, I went ahead and accrued for capital expenses so that we have the ability to fix the parking lot and the elevators and the roof if necessary, so that I've got money left over that's free for me to do whatever I'd like with it. And whatever I would like to do with that is pay you out, Maurice, is what I want to do more than anything. And even, Maurice, after I pay you out, we're still going to have a margin, some gravy left over of $53,000 so that in case it snows too much that year, I've got additional money to be able to pay that contractor. Or in case my landscaping contract amount goes up, I have significant excess cash flows. And so it's from this sheet, the overview that is governed by the rent details, the cash flow projection details, the sources and uses details, and the debt details. It's from these things that I should be able to begin to construct my basic overall message on how to convince Maurice to come in on a deal where his potential, I promise him I'll make them at least 8%. But Maurice, there is the possibility even that I can provide a cash-on-cash return for you of around 11%. Can I, Maurice, please put you down for a $500,000 investment into buying sample property, Chicago, Illinois, USA, and mic drop and scene. If anything, what I was trying to do with you every step of the way there, for me, the most important thing as a business instructor is number one, as Anna Maria suggested, you need to know the terms and you need to know the data. Second thing you got to do is bring the data together and manipulate it within Excel. Third thing that you need to be able to do is package the data in a way that makes sense. So that the fourth thing that you can do is tell a great story. So I gave all of you the data that you need. Number two, I'm trying to show you how to package it and manipulate it within Excel so that you, number three, can on that overview tab come up with a message that you then can deliver to us. Let me see. Anna Maria asked you, should we use the gap principle, like using the matching principle? Might be so. Yeah, gap is the primary. Yeah, we don't use international accounting rules. Gap is our driver right now. Excellent. I agree. Okay. Let me see. I only got a handful of cameras on. Can the rest of you turn your cameras on just so I can see you here? Because how many people are left over? We started with 40. There's 41 of you. Nice. And I got about a dozen of you on screen. Cool. Was that helpful? I tried to go a little slower than I did the other day. I tried to be more verbal about it. I imagine that many of you still might need help with the mechanics of it. Like, how did I actually do this formula and get it to format and copy and paste? And you notice too, when you look at your PDF is 9 pages and they're all printable. Some are landscapes, some are portrait. They all have headers and page numbers and all that stuff. I can go through all of that with you then tomorrow if you would like, and you feel like you need that additional Excel. All right. How do I say this name? Besan, Besan. How do you pronounce that?
Yeah, Bisan, hi.
Besan, go ahead.
We get access to the Excel file because you said that, okay, we don't.
Nope. You have access to the PDF. The Excel file is the answers. I can't just give that to you. You have to produce that.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you for asking. But here's what's nice is if you want, you and your teams, right? I know one team suggested that they meet with us. I can meet with your team and then we can do some sharing on the fly, but I do not share my Excel file with you.
Would be great, actually, would be great. We're going to do all that like when we're, yes.
Feel free.
Yes, thanks a lot.
You're welcome. Stan, you have a question.
Yeah, I probably had exact the same question, but I would like to ask if we had to reproduce this on our own and create our own final financial sheet in Excel. But yeah, it's okay for me. I understand what you have to do.
So again, I always like to think, so if I was a student, what's my job? You need to create a 20-minute persuasive presentation that convinces Maurice and me that Maurice should invest in this property. You can imagine Maurice as a marketing guy is going to be more interested in the concepts, where me as the finance guy is going to want to say, Stan, are you going to have NOI from which to pay back? You're going to buy a $5 million building, you're telling me. You're going to borrow $4 million. Where's my money at? So you better have the ability to demonstrate to me, if I ask that question, that you've thought through the numbers and can display for me. I would say at least, if I was a student, I would want to have the overview ready to share and the cash flow projections ready to share. Yeah, I would want to have those immediately ready. So hopefully that helps you.
Okay, Also another question. The numbers you use, like you have 20 tenants or 10 investors, are those numbers you can decide by your own, or do we have to make use of those numbers?
So in your property packet, in that file, you should have rent roll information that gives you all the current tenants and their rents and their square footages. So don't use mine, use the one specific to your property.
Okay, yeah, that's very clear. Thank you.
You're welcome. My pleasure. Anybody else? Questions for the good of the order? Kevin. Kevin raised his hand and then put it down right away. No? Kevin, you disappeared? Okay. No problem then. So let's do this then right before we exit for the day, which is then a reminder. We've now done an additional amount of Excel work, although there's always more Excel work to do. It's my favorite thing in the world. So tomorrow we can go over and do that a little bit more. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that you have an invitation already sitting in your inboxes for tomorrow. Oh, Kevin, you have your hand up again. Do you still want to ask something? You're on mute,
Yeah,
just
I
so you know.
did,
Okay.
but
Yeah.
I had the wrong microphone plugged in, so it didn't work. But
Okay.
my group already made the Excel financial sheet.
Yeah.
But the problem was with our property, the 191 on Waterman Road. We
Yeah.
don't really have a rent roll. We only have like the square footage of every person, but not like the exact amount they pay.
What I would suggest then, you're talking about 191 Waukegan.
Yeah, but we did have like the
Are you not?
rental
Okay. One of two
numbers.
things. What I would ask is, number one, first, just like I asked Anna Maria, send me a quick email just to ask me your question, and I'll remember to look for the number myself later. And if I think that you need more info, I'll ask you and or your team to just set up a 5-minute meeting with me so we can clarify your numbers.
Okay.
Okay, so yeah, send an email to my inbox. I'll take a peek and look at what you need. And if there's something missing, because I think one of the other groups said like, hey, how come some of the pages are missing? My table of contents doesn't match. Well, that's because some of these have your answers in them already. So I stripped those out to make sure that you guys had to produce them from scratch. So maybe you might be missing something that I can provide for you quickly. Okay?
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
All right, thank you for asking, Kevin. Appreciate it. All right, so let's see then here. If we look over here, then I wanted to see this one. So yeah, that's interesting. It only shares truly one Excel spreadsheet at a time. So if I want to share things with you, I got to look at your desktop. So here's my students. Which one of these made me, so there you go. Is Bernice online? That made me laugh out loud. This one maybe made me laugh harder than anything. Is Alexandra online? That's freaking awesome. I love that because you know what? I don't think of the Dutch as being very funny. You guys, you guys are next to Germany, and they have a significant influence on you. You guys are direct, and I like that about you. Like, there's no. Oh, I'm going to stop recording. See you all tomorrow. Stop recording.